Most business owners are using AI for basic tasks like emails. The ones that are getting ahead, they're using it to transform how they work. I'm Tania Gomez. 6 months ago, I didn't know the difference between ChatGPT and a chatbot. Now I'm learning from AI experts, testing tools in real businesses, and sharing everything that works. Because AI won't replace you, but someone using AI will. This is the AI Apprentice. Join our free community of practice at providercollective.com.au, where hundreds of business owners are learning together. We start as AI apprentices, but we leave as masters. Let's get into it. Welcome to the AI Apprentice. My name is Tania Gomez. I'm your host for today, and I'm joined by the lovely David Hyman from Lendi today. Welcome, David. It's so lovely to have you here.
Thanks, Tania. Great to be here.
Yeah. So I was really interested in talking to you about Lendi's vision of being AI native by 2026. It seems like a really huge goal and something that's not very common in the Australian ecosystem at the moment. Can you tell us a little bit about where you started that journey and what exactly your goals are?
I think the best way to think about it is actually starting with a bit of a landscape overview of where companies are on the AI spectrum. So it is genuinely a spectrum, and there's many points along that spectrum. I think if you start at one side, I'd say most companies are at least AI curious. And what I mean by AI curious is, their board has asked them to have an AI strategy. They've probably adopted something like Gemini or Copilot or ChatGPT Enterprise or Claude Enterprise. But they're largely just doing what they were doing before, and they might have sort of AI playing into some little things that they do. You then move further along that spectrum, and you have what I'd call AI adjacent companies. And so AI adjacent companies have maybe been building with AI for a couple of years. They might have agents in production or lots of use cases live, whether that's generative AI or agentic AI. But largely they're an existing business that has started to build AI to make things a bit better or a bit faster or a bit more efficient or whatever that might be. And then you go all the way to the other side of the spectrum and you got AI native companies. And the characteristics of AI native companies are most of them almost exclusively started in the last couple of years, because that's where the AI tech has been from an evolution perspective. But really the benefit of AI native companies is they didn't have legacy to deal with. So they've started with first principles and they've tried to solve problems with AI in ways that they didn't have to worry about taking that old human process that's been re-engineered a few times, that was, built 15 years ago, that's been iterated on version 1, version 2, version 3, and then bolted AI into the side. They've been able to say, okay, I'm building a finance function. How do I do that with AI in the most efficient way? Or I'm building a go-to-market function. How do I build that with AI in the most efficient way? And AI native companies are faster, they've got better products, and they've got lots and lots of operating leverage. So, the revenue per employee in an AI native company is in some cases 10x the average revenue per employee across most industries. And as a result of that, they are structurally going to be far more competitive over the next few years. And so really, the journey we've been on as a business is we've recognized, while we're the market leader, the journey we've gone on is an AI native version of Lendi will be built at some stage. Right. And we don't want to be competing with them on the back foot. We want to be AI native at the time. And so really what we're trying to do is we've gone on a journey very methodically, both top down and bottom up, really looking at everything that we do internally and asking ourselves a question: if we were building this from scratch today with AI, how would it look? So that's everything from what does our products look like and how do we engage with our customers and our brokers, all the way through to how do we build those products, all the way through to then how do we run the business behind the scenes. And so we're well placed on that journey. And as you said before, by June of 2026, at the end of this financial year, we want to be, our definition of AI native is basically having the whole Lendi brand experience as AI native. We've got 2 brands. Aussie's our main brand in terms of our broking business. And we want to have every Aussie customer and every Aussie broker engaging with agents every day. And then we also want to have every one of our team members using agents as part of their daily job. So we're well on track across each of those three objectives, but the team's got lots of work to do over the next 6 or 7 months.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So you talked about AI native businesses starting in the last few years and not having the element of legacy to deal with. Aussie Home Loans and Lendi are both, they're definitely not brand new companies. How then are you managing to pivot and deal with that said legacy?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. It really comes down to how we've thought about solving the problems. I describe it as the faster horses problem. So we've spent a lot of time helping our team best understand how can AI tools be used, but how can you build new experiences from a first principles basis? And so what that's allowed us to do is it's allowed us to kind of enable teams to do their own work around kind of ideation around what that AI native version of their part of the business looks like. In addition to that, we've also, and again, as I said before, it's not just one strategy. We've also found ways to, we had a project we kicked off in, and we've talked quite a bit publicly about this, a project we kicked off earlier this year called Project Aurora. And Project Aurora was basically looking at the Lendi brand that we operate. And we actually pulled a whole team aside and said, if you guys had AI from day zero and you rebuilt this business, what would it look like? And we effectively, 4 months, thousands and thousands of hours worth of work. We built it all in our environment, but we effectively rebuilt that whole experience with AI at the core. And that allowed us to basically come at it from a first principles perspective without legacy. But the short answer to your question, though, is you have to really think critically about why does a process exist in the first place? What purpose does it serve? And then from a first principles perspective, okay, great. Once you've defined that, how can you use AI to go from A to B?
Yeah. It seems extraordinary in a company the size of Lendi or Aussie that you can do that. I would imagine that it must come down to leadership and vision really from you and the culture that you've created to allow yourself to be able to pivot and move in a direction like that. Because I've worked with large companies previously doing things like digital transformations, and the people side of it is, putting the process together is one thing, but actually getting people to accept change, the digital transformation process, the change management of the people is actually really, really challenging. Do you just have the most amazing culture and your team are all on board, or was it a process of taking them on down a track over time of letting them come on board with it, letting them experiment? Like how did you get the people on side?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There's really 2 reasons why I think we've been able to do it. The first reason is we are a product and technology business, and we've gone through a reasonably large transformation in the last few years. And so I'd say we are battle fit, so to speak, in that context. And we were able to kind of flex a muscle that we already had operating in the business. And so that's been a really big contributor to that whole thing. But the second aspect has been exactly as you just described. It's really how have we taken the people on the journey from a leadership perspective, and really we've treated this as an existential opportunity / problem, and that then becomes its own rally cry in its own way. And what I mean by that is, while we are a large business and we have, in the segments we operate in, we are the market leaders, AI has fundamentally shifted what is a moat for a business. And the conversation we've had with all of our people is AI is not coming for your jobs. Someone using AI is. And again, I know that phrase has been used a number of times. It's not original with us. But if you sort of come at things from that perspective, what it allows you to do is then say, well, if this is the leadership mindset, and this is, for our people, this is the mindset of our leaders. How do we get on board that journey? Because, I can assure you, you'd rather be in a place where your leaders have that mindset than a place where your leaders are sitting on their hands waiting for the solution to be shown to them. Because the reality is this is the fastest technology revolution or phase of revolution that we've ever had. And while it feels like things are happening quickly now, I can assure you that things are only going to speed up in terms of the impact on society, the impact on businesses. And so it's really important that business leaders treat it as an existential issue, because if they don't, an AI native version of their business will exist pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And, that business is going to be faster, with a better product, with structurally better costs, and that's going to be pretty hard to compete with.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes a big difference. I think, I had an e-learning business for many years, and during COVID, I'd never had so many schools that I onboarded to digital education so quickly. And that really was that they had no choice. They'd been talking about it for years, thinking about it for years. And we even had things in the vocational education sector where it was incentivized to drop student load to be online. And even that really didn't push people along as much as COVID happening and your business modeling needing to pivot overnight. And I think the parallels there to AI and the speed of adoption, kind of, you have a little bit of more leeway because it's not closing doors today, but it is a really short runway to try and get this technology, because that gap just keeps widening between what people are using and what the company is used to doing, and the way that the company operates just changes so fundamentally when you start having those first principles as that basis that you're working from.
Yeah, exactly.
You've used the term Agentic AI, and I hear this term quite a lot. Can you explain what AI agents actually mean in your business context, and how this is different than just your team using Copilot or ChatGPT as an AI assistant?
Yeah, look, that's a really good framing there at the back. So maybe just to kind of, before I give our business context, I'll just kind of, state a couple of things at like a high level. So when ChatGPT first came out, really the technology that's underpinning that is generative AI. So you put in a prompt, the underlying model then takes that prompt as input. It's obviously trained on a whole corpus of information, and then it produces an output. And that is generative AI. And that output, initially was text, and now you got the multimodal approach, and there's stable diffusion for images, and there's video models and audio models and all that sort of stuff. And that's really about an AI creating an output in one of those modes, basically. Agentic AI is using generative AI, but it's where an agent, so something that is autonomous, it has a prompt, so similar to generative AI, but the agent then also, and again, different platforms have different features and functionality, but in the most general sense, an agent then has an objective to achieve, which is described in the prompt. It has tools it can use. So those tools could be web search, those tools could be APIs that it calls, those tools could be data services that it brings in. And then effectively and typically speaking, an AI agent is operating no different to how a team member would be operating. So it has a job that it needs to do. It's running the background, or it's responding to a stimulus, and that stimulus could be on a timer. That stimulus could be a user using a system. The stimulus could be a trigger or a workflow, whatever that might be. And it is going and achieving its objective using its tools. And it's doing it in a non-deterministic way. So it's not a series of workflow steps. I think by definition, the agent is doing it, slightly differently every single time. So to maybe bring that to life in a couple of really practical examples in our business, one of the first AI agents we deployed is a voice agent. So customers used to call us after hours. We would basically say, look, it's after hours. You can call back during business hours, or you can leave a message. And something like 17% of people would leave a message. We then deployed our out of hours agent. And so now what happens there is we say, it's out of hours, and you can speak to our AI agent who's available 24/7, can answer all your questions, can do all these things for you. We now have 80% of people staying on to speak to the AI agent, and the AI agent is just a voice agent that can have a conversation, it can look up information, it can do a whole bunch of other things. But now what we're doing is we're giving customers what they're looking for kind of around the clock. And then if there's action for one of our people to take, the agent can then pass it on to the person in the right way. And so what that means is customers are now getting their answer quicker. But also really the key thing there is the agent is basically in the background now doing that work. Give you another example. So that's a customer facing one that I just gave you. I'll give you another example here, which is more of a internal business agent. So anyone who's listening would know that if you work in a small, medium, or really small, medium, or large business, most businesses sizes, you typically have a cadence of one-on-ones with, either with your manager or with your direct reports. Those one-on-ones are typically there to provide updates, help you with blockers, and help you with back and forth around how, as a leader, you can help your people. We've got a one-on-one and planning agent that effectively looks at people's calendar, looks at the core projects people are looking at, pulls in multiple data sources across the business, and then surfaces a suggested agenda and topic areas to the manager and the individual, and saves them both time of preparation, but also gets them really, really focused on the key topics they need to be discussing. It operates in the background. The trigger is the calendar. It looks at what that one-on-one cadence is. But effectively, if you're to pull a directly, equivalent version of that, like maybe a executive in a large business would have an exec assistant that goes and does that prep work, but this now means that sort of experience is now scalable to hundreds of managers in our business, who clearly we're not going to have hundreds and hundreds of exec assistants doing that sort of stuff all the time. So that's just a couple of different examples, but we have literally, tens or hundreds of use cases live like that across the business where there's agentic AI.
And how did you decide on what should be an agent versus generative AI versus an automation in your business?
Yeah, very good question. Lots of people are building agents for agents' sake. The short answer is actually all three are often applicable. So generative AI is really there to kind of take inputs and use AI to produce outputs. And so anything that you need to do where that is the case, generative AI should be used, and it's part of the agentic process. Really, where agents are really powerful versus workflows is workflows are by definition deterministic. So if you know that here are the 8 steps you need to take, those 8 steps don't differ, and you can program that on a workflow automation platform or inside a CRM. You should just keep doing that because it is far cheaper and less complicated and easy to maintain, easy to have governance around it and all that sort of stuff. Where agents make sense, the best analogy is where before AI, you would probably have a person doing something because the software was too hard to build. And so we really try and think of AI agents as like team members. And so where you had to use it would defer to a human because either building software was either too hard or too expensive. That's the best spot to have agents. Now, my answer before around, it can sometimes be all of them, is we do have lots of deterministic workflows in our business today where some of the nodes of those workflows are agents. So the workflow is stringing together the end-to-end approach, but at step 3, great, call this agent to do that thing, and the agent might have access to tools or whatever that might be. So it's not one size fits all.
And I guess in that same example, you would then also potentially have humans in those loops as well at certain points if there was an escalation point or if a decision had to be made that the agents weren't at the level to make those decisions yet.
Yeah, we have we use two models. One's human on the loop and one's human in the loop. The human on the loop model is the humans are designing the system and handling the overflow where the agent can't operate. And human in the loop is where a human, as you said, sits there at a particular point in the process and is a stage gate, really. Some of our experiences, and I mentioned before, Project Aurora, which basically rebuilt the AI native version of Lendi. The core product that came out of Aurora is an experience called Guardian, which is a agentic home loan experience. So you can download the Guardian app, and as a customer, you can go through the whole home loan journey. It started with refinance, and we're soon adding purchase in there, but you can go through the whole refinance journey with AI agents. We operate in a regulated space, so the majority of the steps there are human on the loop, so you can genuinely do almost all of it by just dealing with agents. But then we've introduced the human in the loop at key stage gates, both around trust and compliance. And that's a very, very deliberate design decision for us as we roll products like that out.
Yeah, that's fascinating. You've previously described AI as a workforce multiplier by removing drudgery so that humans can focus on more human tasks. Can you give us an example of how you use this with your clients to make sure that they are still getting their customer service or their human needs met, while allowing, I guess, staff to focus on what's most important?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple of examples here. So the way we sort of think about this, and in particular, like if I think about our Aussie business as an example, so Aussie is the largest retail mortgage broker. It's got the market leading tech platform. It's powered by the Lendi platform, obviously all under the Aussie brand. And it has kind of gone to market with a couple of core propositions, but one of those core propositions is trust. And as a result, lots of customers come to Aussie brokers because they trust the Aussie broker and their advice in the process. All of that being said, and we've been able to automate a lot because it's obviously on the platform. With all of that said, Aussie brokers spend a lot of time, depending on where they are in the process, doing things that I'd say are low value. They're not trust building necessarily, and perhaps they are manual or inefficient. What we're able to do with AI and even agentic AI is start to introduce agents to take away some of that busy work, the drudgery that you just described, so the brokers can spend time on trust. So an example of something we're working on at the moment, this is not live with brokers yet, is called Linda. So Linda basically looks at every customer live. So it's kind of always scanning all of our customers, and it's working out what do we need to get from that customer, or what value can we give to this customer, kind of pull them along the journey. So that could be preparing them for an appointment, or it could be getting them to send through their payslip. And Linda has access to a bunch of tools. Those tools are like WhatsApp or SMS or phone calls or emails. And so Linda basically is always looking at what can we do next? How do we help the customer in the next step? And what channel should I engage through? And then what should I say to that customer? When we deploy that to our Aussie customers, what that's going to mean is our Aussie brokers are going to have to spend less time going, gosh, who was I meant to call back? And what should I say to them? And what channel should I use to do that? Linda's going to be in the background helping them do that stuff, so that they can focus on the high quality stuff like, hey, I've got your loan information through now. Let's talk about the structure that I'm recommending, as an example. Another example, and this is actually just rolled out to all of our Aussie brokers, is called Contract Analyzer. So for every purchase that we do, there is a contract to sale. Those contract to sale are often 1, 2, 3, 4, 500 pages. They're not in a standard format typically. There's lots of other things in there. And typically a combination of the broker and the conveyancer will review that contract to sale and help the customer make a decision whether that's what's their bidding strategy or are there due diligence issues they need to deal with. And there's a really big break in the process because typically the customer will have to go to the conveyancer. That costs money, hundreds of dollars, takes time, often at best a few hours, but most of the time a few days. And so that becomes a natural friction point in the process. What we've done is we've built a product called Contract Analyzer. It's on our broker platform. The broker can just upload the contract to sale, and in under 2 minutes and for less than 12 cents, we get a full contract summary, which is like, here's all the things you need to know. Here's the things you should negotiate on. Here's some of the due diligence items you should speak to your conveyancer about, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And what that allows our brokers to do is just have higher quality conversations with their customers without having to trawl through hundreds and hundreds of pages of documents. So those are just two examples, but hopefully help articulate how we're taking the drudgery away in that context.
Yeah, I really love that you've got those two main priorities for humans being trust and compliance, about building trust with your clients, making sure that they're well taken care of, and then obviously meeting your regulatory responsibilities and making sure, I suppose, that the regulator is then happy with the processes. I don't know much about regulation in the financial services space, but I'm currently doing a PhD that looks at the key success factors of small and medium businesses in government regulated spaces. And I'm comparing education providers to NDIS providers. So quite different, but I can't help but be interested in the regulatory piece of what you're doing. How do you think, if you've had the opportunity so far to explain this to the regulator, or what's your strategy at your next audit or your next regulatory point of how will you explain this to an auditor to make sure that they feel secure in what you've developed?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question. So the way we've thought about it is, and this is, we've kind of a little bit of cheating here, because we've always had this is part of our core strategy. So when we first built the business back in 2013, we were coming into a highly regulated space, and we were largely unknown in mortgages. And so the bar for us, we decided, rather than have to try and sort of be in a position where we say, here's why a digital platform is better than the alternative way of doing it, or here's why we meet the compliance bar, we've always had a principle of compliance as a competitive advantage. So what we've always tried to do there is we've said, what is the bar in the industry, and how do we not just meet the bar, but how do we leap over the bar?
Yeah.
And so as an example, and how that applies to AI, what we're able to do really with AI versus, say, a traditional human process is, with AI, everything is observable. So every input, every output, you can set up guardrails, and then you've got the design choices around human on the loop and human in the loop. And what we're able to do in that scenario is we're basically able to build out a compliance framework that says, here's how compliance would work in the traditional sense. And just without going through the end to end, or the line by line, compliance in the traditional sense in the mortgage broking space. So ASIC is the regulator. There's a whole bunch of different obligations you need to meet as a broker group, as an aggregator. And those obligations are met typically through a line 1, 2, and 3 approach. As part of that, though, it's typically line 2 and line 3 are done on hindsight and the samples. What AI allows you to do, and it's samples of the artifacts, not of the conversations or everything. Whereas with AI, you've got everything on the record. You've got every chat conversation, you've got every phone conversation, you've got every email, absolutely every interaction with the customer. And you've also got what those then turn into inputs into the model, and why did the model make that recommendation around this thing. And so combination of a very, very high bar around the risk management framework, which is a combination of just observe what we call observability, so seeing everything that happens, guardrails, so stopping things happen when they shouldn't, and then evaluations, looking at what happened and saying, is anything happened that we wouldn't have liked to have happened? So you get a full kind of observable world there, and then basically applying that same approach that I described before around human on the loop and human in the loop, and just making sure that you're not saying that this is end-to-end AI and it's autonomous and there's never a human involved. You're saying, hey, what are the key points where a person needs to get involved? How do you empower that person with all the information they need to make a decision? And how do you make sure that when they're making that decision, they're making that decision with far better, richer information that is immutable, so it can't have changed, vis-a-vis, say, the old process where maybe they're working on imperfect information and it's not observable and it's not traceable, etc. So the short answer to your question is, because everything is observable and you have the approach of human in the loop, you're able to then basically have a much higher bar than you could pre-AI.
Wow, it's fascinating. You obviously have quite a lot of resources in Lendi to be able to do things like the Aurora project and really sit down and reimagine your processes. If you were in a small or a medium business and had limited resources, where would you start on your journey to become AI native, or at least progress from AI curious to AI adjacent?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So one of the things that has been really, really cool about this whole AI wave is leverage. And so building software used to be, firstly, it was specialized. So you had to have engineers to do all the work. And it was also expensive. It took a lot of time. It needed a lot of resources. And because of that, you needed to be a big organization. With AI, you can basically, you could be a 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 person business without a lot of resources. And if you have the right approach around what you're doing and you're choosing the right tools, you can actually create a lot of leverage for yourself. So my advice to people, if they're in that bucket, whether they're just starting out or they are a small business today, it's to start with a bit of a framework. And I'll just share the framework that we use, or one of the ways we think about it. And it's basically got 3 key pillars. So the first pillar is, with AI, how does what you're building for your customers change? So whether you're a mortgage company or whether you're a NDIS company, every company has a product or a service. So starting with AI, what does that product or service look like, and really thinking about that through first principles. The second aspect is, how do you build that product or service? So again, if I just give you an example, in our world, it used to take 12 weeks to ship a new product. There was a cycle we run, which was, every a few times a year, we run an increment or a planning cycle. As part of that planning cycle, you work out what you're going to do, you prioritize, you work out dependencies, and you stage things. That used to be a 12-week. You'd have the planning session. It would take 12 weeks to kind of go from requirements to designs to build to testing, et cetera, et cetera. That now happens in 5 to 10 days for each of those same increments, because we're able to prototype really quickly. So the way we build software is very, very different. We're using tools that are like, some of these tools you can get either the versions we're using or equivalents for $29 a month, like whether you're using Lovable or Magic Patterns. Now, you don't necessarily need to build your software in those, but you can prototype ideas. You can then get that into a development cycle. So anyway, how you build your product or service is really, really important. And then the final aspect is, how do you run your business? And so lots of people think about AI as maybe, putting an AI button on your existing product, or maybe using AI to help accelerate one of your existing services. But fundamentally, where a lot of the unlock comes from, and hopefully the examples I've given today will help, is, what does your business operating model look like now with AI? And so if you think about all the different things that you do on a daily basis, a weekly basis, a monthly basis, how are those things impacted by AI? So if you're a client-facing business, what's your process before a client meeting? What's your process in the meeting? What's your process outside of the meeting as it relates to AI? And how do you have AI agents helping you with that? So as a very, very simplistic example, you could have an AI agent that looks at who's on the meeting, what the topic area is, what were the last few conversations, and sends you a summary ahead of time. It says, you got a meeting with Tania. Here's what the meeting's about, and here's 3 key topic areas that you guys should focus on. You can then have an AI meeting assistant in the meeting, summarizing the meeting and sending you notes afterwards. And after that, you can have another agent that's making sure that you do the follow-up or helping that information get to the right place. That's just a really, really basic example, but to bring to life how running the business can be slightly different in AI. And you can apply that same thing to, how do you do your accounts? How do you do your accounts payable? How do you go to market? Whatever that might be for the business. But it's really, I think, coming back to your question, it's really about coming up with a high-level framework and then methodically working through your business, and kind of stack ranking things based on where it's going to drive the most value to you.
Yeah, okay. I think that was really great framework. It's interesting to hear how you've kind of put those pillars together, and I liked the examples. When you talk about stack ranking, I guess for context, a lot of people seem to be focusing on the tools. I need to use ChatGPT. I need to use, they've seen a tool and they want to use a tool, as opposed to thinking about so I think of it in two ways. Either you start with AI to solve your biggest problem, or do you start where you're going to add the most value, or are you looking for the lowest hanging fruit? There's quite a number of ways where you could start using AI. And I guess it will depend on lots of different things, like how comfortable people are using AI, etc. But if you were starting this journey again, knowing what you are now, would you be stack ranking and having a look at where you're going to add the most value in the company, or would you be looking at solving the biggest problem first, or would it be something completely different?
It's not any of those things individually. This is such a big problem / opportunity that you actually need to come at it from a multi-stage approach. And if I was starting again today, I think we would have gone a lot harder up front on the concept of just like one of the things we did quite well, but we could have gone harder and faster on this, is just getting people to use it in there every day. Just to your point about it, you're comfortable with the tools. The only way you get comfortable is you start using it. And so there's plenty of people in our organization that I can think of where the step change that they saw was when they started using, whether it was ChatGPT or Claude or whatever the tool was that we enabled, as part of their daily workflow. So just choose one thing that you do and encourage in your organization, whether that's 5 or 10 people or 500 people, to use a tool where it makes a lot of sense, and that will help with the comfort levels and literacy in the business. It's then really top down and bottom up. So we've gone after the biggest problems top down, or the biggest opportunities top down. And then we've enabled through tooling all of our teams to go bottom up on what they see as the opportunities in their teams. And it's really the confluence of all of those things, and then having a framework around monitoring what's working, what's not. Like, not getting too caught up. I've heard a lot of people get stuck on individual use case ROI management, and that's like just stops people get started, or it makes them confused as opposed around, is the thing that I've just delivered really delivering value? It's not as one-to-one as that. What we found is that it's actually a collection of things that will ultimately drive outcomes, and you don't quite know which collection of those things will drive the outcomes. You really just have to kind of get in and see. It doesn't mean don't measure it. It just means don't get too caught up in trying to have a very observable, I'm going to build this agent or this use case and it's going to cost me Y and it's going to deliver Z ROI. Like, that's far too granular for this. But you might say, hey, here are the 5 things we're going to do in finance. The objective in finance is to have, I'm just making this up, a day 1 close rather than closing your financial accounts on day 10. This collection of 5 or 10 things is going to get us there, but we don't quite know which ones are going to be the thing that will get us there, in the end, if that makes sense. And so really just, the collective theme for all of this really is just, you got to get your team comfortable. You got to get the business using the tools, and through using the tools, you'll come up with the bottom-up ideas, and really challenging people to think from first principles and really drive things forward in a way that is not just building or bolting AI onto what we used to do yesterday.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. My last question for you today is around your AI experimentation personally. And I'm interested in one personal experiment where you've tried AI that either failed or taught you something that you didn't expect.
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I've got lots and lots of experimentation happening all the time. One of the things that was really, really interesting, and this is just how fast the space is moving, is I had one of my favorite, and I'm going to try and be true to your question and give you a real fail, but this is probably a slightly weak answer. But I had this scheduled prompt on ChatGPT that every Sunday would look at all the topics that I'd been speaking about during the week, and it would write a letter to me that would basically test and challenge me on those topics that I was speaking about and give me some useful insight that was happening in the market related to those topics. So it was quite a timely thing that would come every Sunday. So as I start my week, it kind of got my headspace into the next week. ChatGPT on their Pro model then launched Pulse, which is one of the best, I think, consumer products that's been launched in the last few years. And Pulse just took it to the whole next level. So it basically watches all of your prompts. It creates an understanding layer around what you're interested in. And then it effectively, every morning, it writes I'm going to say 9 or 10 articles for you. And they're effectively framed as articles, but they're just ultimately prompts with outputs based on things that it thinks you are interested in and the topics that you're discussing. So it's incredibly timely and relevant. And really, as I said, it was probably a slightly weak answer to your question, not exactly a fail, but just shows you how fast the space is moving. When I had this thing that was delivering real value to me every Sunday, I'd show this to people and say, look how cool this is. It's relevant to my life. And then all of a sudden, someone just brings out a product that just completely blows it out of the water. And so I think the lesson for people is just keep testing, keep trying things, and don't get yourself too stuck on a single tool. I probably oscillate between Grok, ChatGPT, and Claude as my three main tools, and more recently, lots of Gemini, in particular for Nano Banana. But really, the lesson there is just the space is moving so quickly that there is so much more value to be had, and don't be closed-minded to it.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. Thank you so much for your time today, David. It's been so amazing speaking to you, and I look forward to seeing you hit that goal in June next year.
Great. Thanks, Tania. Awesome to be here.
In 30 minutes, you just learned what most business owners will spend months trying to figure out on their own. Want to keep that momentum going? Join our free AI Apprentice community at providercollective.com.au. Hundreds of business owners testing tools and sharing real wins. Come and be an AI Apprentice with me. Let's become masters together. I'll see you next week, or better yet, I'll see you inside the community today.